We have a lot of people move to the Twin Cities, and specifically a lot of people choose Minneapolis, and I think for good reason. I live in Minneapolis, I love Minneapolis, but on this video we're diving into the map and I'm going to show you around sort of virtually so you can get a sense of where these different neighborhoods are and what the vibe might be in different places. Let's do it. All right, excited to show you around a little bit here. Let's just dive into the map here. And I'm just using Google Maps because I think that's the most universally available, easiest thing to find, and probably something that y'all have been looking at. Maybe you've been looking at like Zillow or Realtor.com or whatever, that's all fine. But I'm sure you've been looking at this map quite a bit. And specifically, we're talking only Minneapolis today. I'm gonna do another video on only St. Paul neighborhoods, but they're large enough and different enough that I think they should have their own video. And we have a lot of videos on specific neighborhoods, comparing Minneapolis to St. Paul, all that stuff. But really, this one is just a deep dive into this section on Google Maps. If you didn't know, you can click on different neighborhoods and Google will give you an outline, right? So there's an Uptown, there's Powderhorn, but for now, we're starting here on Minneapolis. And I just want to show you the basic outline as Google will show it. And then I have other screens that I'm going to switch over to basically help show certain aspects of the neighborhoods. And before I go any further, I just want to say I'm not really going to be talking about crime or safety. The truth is, as a realtor, we have to be very careful about not using those things as like coded language about other protected classes, and that's not something I'm interested in doing. And honestly, I think we're really, really good at helping people end up where they want to be, and without using any kind of discrimination or discriminating based upon protected classes. I honestly think it's like lazy behavior of a real estate agent to try to use those things or be like, yes, that is safe, or no, that is not safe, because I believe that safety, or the feeling of safety, is a very relative concept depending on where you come from. I'm 6'4", I look how I look, I'm a pretty big dude, and I don't really get messed with. And my idea of safe is gonna be very different than, say, my fiance's idea of safe. When we're together, we're gonna feel different than when it's just one of us as well, right? So those blanket terms of like, is it safe, is it not safe? I'm not going to be talking about that in this video, but I will say if you are particularly curious or interested in that and you're into the statistics side of things, if you go just to Google, type in Minneapolis crime maps, I find that it's the third one down. It's like ArcGIS online, and then it says Minneapolis Police Department crime map. If you click on that, it'll bring you to a pretty interactive map where you can click all sorts of things. You click the I agree to the above terms, and it'll open up a map that will show you a bunch of data if that is your thing. Again, I'm not going to be including that in this video because I don't want it to be taken or misconstrued as me trying to paint a certain kind of picture. So this is obviously the border of the city of Minneapolis on Google Maps. I'm going to click over to a tab with it's Open Data Minneapolis. It's from the Minneapolis government. And fundamentally what it's doing is showing you the boundaries of what are known as different communities, right? There's a difference between communities and neighborhoods in Minneapolis. There's also wards out there that exist. Mostly this is going to be based on the communities, because those are larger chunks and larger pieces of the metro. And then within each community, they're going to be different neighborhoods. Basically to run through what these all are, you could go to the same thing too, by the way, which is opendata.minneapolismn.gov, and it's going to have this. And so you click on this, a little menu comes up, and it'll say what the common name of the neighborhood is. So this furthest one to the northwest, that's called Camden. The one right to the south of that is called Near North. The one just to the east of that is called Northeast. To the southeast of that is called University. right in kind of the center here. It's the downtown area. That's called Central, actually. There's also a neighborhood called Central, kind of confusing, but this community is called Central. Just to the southwest of that is called Calhoun Isles. To the east of that, you have the Powderhorn Community. To the north of that, you have the Phillips Community. To the east over here in this sort of diagonally shaped piece, that is called the Longfellow Community. To the west of that is the Nokomis Community. And then lastly, to the west here is called Southwest. Real quick interruption from the video here. My name is Jesse Lynch. I run the hardest working real estate team in the game. We're called To the Twin Cities. And this YouTube channel, as you can probably see, is all about helping people find a place to call home here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. And relocations is what we do, and it's what we do better than anybody else. It's what we're solving problems for on the daily basis. It's what we're thinking about all the time, is basically how to best help folks like yourself move to the Twin Cities and buy a home when you get here. So if that sounds at all appealing to you, then do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell to get notified if you want to. We put out a lot of videos on this channel, and we try to make them the best, most helpful video that possibly exists anywhere on the internet. And if you're interested in working with us, we would love to help. You can go to our website, tothetwincities.com. There's a contact form there that you can fill out in like 30 seconds or less. And there are other ways to reach out, but that is honestly the best, most efficient route. So I'm not even going to say the other options because that is how we would prefer and how we've found to be most useful to folks like yourself. Back to the video. And I have virtual tours on this channel for a lot of these communities, but not all of them. And I even have virtual tours for, you know, the sub neighborhoods within these for certain neighborhoods that are, you know, of maybe of particular interest to different people. So let's start with, I have a Calhoun Isles virtual tour. I have a Southwest Minneapolis. I have at least 2 of those. I have a Nokomis, and I'm actually going to work on a Nokomis virtual tour very, very soon. Another one, I have a Longfellow neighborhood virtual tour. I have a Central Minneapolis. I think it's just called Downtown Minneapolis virtual tour. I'll probably do another one of these soon as well, because downtown is always changing, and it's a pretty interesting place. Then I do have one over here of the University neighborhood. It's also known by other names, Como, etc. And then I have one on Northeast as well. So I'm going to pop back over to this map, and if you're looking on Google, the way that these things are divided out, often a highway is going to be a main dividing line, but then sometimes just a road, etc. So I'm going to type in Southwest Minneapolis here. I'm going to have it sort of pull up just what that neighborhood is. You're going to see that it's divided to the east by 35W, to the south by Highway 62. Along the west, it's mostly France Avenue, a little bit of Xerxes Avenue, and then to the north, you have 36th Street West. Just to the northwest of Southwest, you're going to have the Calhoun Isles community, which is going to contain many different areas. You can see though that it includes a lot of basically what used to be called Lake Calhoun. It's now called Bedemakoska, but it still includes things like Calhoun Square, which is sort of a shopping center right there, a commercial district, if you will, or commercial core, if you will. That western border is basically going to be France Avenue until it disappears, then it's just a straight line north. The southern border, more or less, is 36th. The northern border gets a little bit wonky up here, right? You can kind of see that more or less it's Bassett Creek or somewhere along Bassett Creek. And then the eastern border is I-94 and then Lyndale Avenue all the way over here. We'll keep working our way due north. So you're going to find, this is one thing, a strange variant as far as what the city says and what Google says. Google will say that only this is near north. But if we switch back to the open data map, you'll see that like this whole section is considerably larger, and that is considered near north according to the city. So that's how I've always understood it, and how I've talked about on this channel is that the Lowry Avenue North is the northern border of what is called near north, and Theodore Wirth Parkway and Theodore Wirth Park is that western border over here, and then you have Bassett Creek again as that southern border, and then I-94 again pretty much all the way up to the river, more or less, then becomes that eastern border. And then to the north of Lowry Avenue is the furthest northwest neighborhood, which is known as the Camden neighborhood. Google actually gets this one right, so I don't know why near north is the one exception that I found as far as their community borders go. Maybe they know something I don't know. But again, this is the Camden neighborhood. The southern border is Lowry Avenue. The western border is it's Xerxes Avenue, but it's also where Memorial Parkway starts. And then the northern border is all the way up at 53rd Avenue North. And the eastern border, more or less, is the river the whole way along. Now we'll scoot across the river to where you have what's known as Northeast Minneapolis. Also, probably one of the largest neighborhoods in all of Minneapolis proper. It takes up a lot of space, and you'll see that there's no neighborhood to the north or the south of it, right? So that's partly why it's large, is because weirdly enough, at 37th Avenue Northeast is where Minneapolis stops. And then right above there is Columbia Heights, which feels pretty similar to Northeast for a lot of reasons, especially, you know, these first, 10 or so blocks north of Northeast in Columbia Heights. It feels pretty similar, but Columbia Heights is in a completely different county from Northeast Minneapolis. It's in Anoka County. So kind of a strange little carve out there, but nonetheless, here's Northeast Minneapolis. And you can see here that fundamentally the western border is the river again. So it's funny here, I'm like, well, do they consider the river part of the neighborhood? Not really, I guess, just the shorefront. So anyway, western border is the river. Southern border gets a little wonky down here. More or less, I would say it's Hennepin Avenue. That kind of curves over here. And then the eastern border, again, more or less is Stinson. But again, you can see kind of like, chips its way over here somehow. And then the northern border, like I said earlier, is 37th Avenue. Then we're gonna move southeast. And this is another one of those things where Google can't quite pull up the same boundary as the city's website, as that open data will say. So just to show you, here's on open data, this is the neighborhood known as University, according to the city. And it's got an interesting border. It's a pretty funky shape, to be honest. So I'll show you that more or less it's kind of 35W along here. Actually, the border of Northeast is being helpful here to kind of show where that goes. So 35W here, and then you go right into here. Our office, actually where I'm sitting right now as I make this, is basically right here. So it's not quite Northeast. It's about 2 blocks from Northeast. And it is technically in that university community, and more specifically, it's in a neighborhood called Nicollet Island, which is funny. I didn't know that anything other than the island itself right here was known as Nicollet Island until we got the shop, and that's where it is. And so more or less that southern border is gonna go along the river here again, and then it does cut over into this section, so 35W helps to carve that out, as well as 94, and that contains the neighborhood known as Cedar Riverside. And then you kind of come back up here over to 280, along I-94 and over to 280 and back up to this little corner. So that whole section right here is what is known as University, and it does of course contain the University of Minnesota, among other things. There's a lot of variety in this area. Then from there, I would say that the next neighborhood up is going to be called the Phillips neighborhood of Minneapolis. It's one of the smallest little enclaves of all of Minneapolis. It's quite small. Notably, it contains Abbott Northwestern Hospital and Children's Minnesota Hospital of Minneapolis. That takes up a decent bit of land. And the northern border is 94, eastern border is Highway 55, southern border is East Lake Street, and western border is 35W. Just to the south of there is the Powderhorn neighborhood. I clicked on that pretty early in this, but it's one of the weirder shaped neighborhoods, in my opinion, where it sort of gets a couple extra little pieces that, you wouldn't necessarily think as like, oh, this is probably part of Powderhorn community. And a lot of that is because that community jumps over 35W. And most of these neighborhoods, those like major highways, are the boundary. It contains what's known as the Whittier neighborhood and the Lindale neighborhood, all of what's known as basically part of Powderhorn. You see that there's Powderhorn Park, but more or less Lindale Avenue is that western border until it cuts over at 36th, because this section is called Kingfield, that's part of Southwest. Then you have 35W for a little bit more, a handful of blocks more. And then that southern border is 42nd Street. Until it's 43rd randomly, right above the golf course and Lake Hiawatha Park. And then again, it goes over to Highway 55. And I can't remember if I said it or not, but Lake Street is that northern border. A pretty big neighborhood as well. I would say getting close to being as large as Northeast Minneapolis because it gets kind of those what feel like bonus neighborhoods for it. And then just to the east of Powderhorn, right across Highway 55 here, and really this whole kind of diagonally shaped slice of Minneapolis is what's known as Longfellow Community. But what's interesting again is if you type in Longfellow, Minneapolis, it's actually just going to show you the Longfellow neighborhood, which is within the Longfellow community. So kind of another weirdness with Google Maps, but nonetheless, this whole thing, according to the city, is Longfellow Community, and within Longfellow Community is Longfellow neighborhood right here. And so the boundaries are basically I-94 right along here, the Mississippi River, all the way to the east, to where it sort of hits a point with Highway 55, and then that's going to run up and basically create that southern and western border of the Longfellow neighborhood. Then we're going to jump into the Nokomis neighborhood, which is one of the two southernmost neighborhoods. And one thing that's interesting, I think people find, strange, is that this is called Southwest. A lot of people think that this would be called Southeast. It's not. It's called the Nokomis neighborhood. And if anything, if it's known colloquially as anything other than Nokomis, it would probably just be called South Minneapolis. So if you ever hear somebody say South Minneapolis, this is probably what they're talking about. But what's interesting is there's a clear delineation between South Minneapolis and Southwest Minneapolis. I don't know if that's helpful. I always found that weird when I first started living in the city proper. So the northern border of the Nokomis neighborhood is 42nd Street. The eastern border is Highway 55. The southern border is Highway 62, and the western border is 35W. You can see this right here is the airport, MSP, the main airport, the big airport. It's delightfully centrally located to the metro, but there can be some real airport noise over here in particular. If you just to pay attention to, these are the runways. Okay, so that's where planes are taking off and landing at those angles. There's one that goes this way. I think this is used less often. There's one that goes this way. That's used considerably less often. That's my understanding. For the record, I'm not an air traffic controller or anything close to that. I'm not a pilot or anything, but I have actually helped quite a few pilots, and I even helped an air traffic controller in a house search. So I did ask a lot of questions about, is there ever flight noise over St. Paul, for example? Which yes, sometimes, but only usually when the wind is blowing from a strange area. So the most common flight paths are approximately over this area. And that said, there's a lot of really, really beautiful houses, a lot of beautiful neighborhoods over there. Plenty of people live there with what would be considered the loudest flight noise in the Twin Cities, and people love those neighborhoods. We actually, side note, I know I've done a lot of those. We have a podcast episode with some folks who we helped move to this little neighborhood right here. It's called the Hale neighborhood, who talk about the airport noise, but they really just kind of poo-poo it because they say it does not really affect their lifestyle at all. They got used to it super, super quickly. And then that's going to be the last neighborhood that we talked about because, again, we started here in the Southwest Minneapolis neighborhood. So I'll go back to click to Minneapolis as a whole. And for a little bit of context, for more of like a colloquial understanding of how people will talk about this, you will hear people say, it's kind of funny, it's not necessarily accurate, but you will hear people say South Minneapolis, Southwest Minneapolis. Some people will call this whole thing uptown, and you might find like apartment postings on Craigslist or Facebook where they say uptown, and it's definitely not uptown. It's it's Whittier or something like that. But sort of people will blanket statement this whole thing is uptown. People will blanket this whole area as North Minneapolis. Northeast is actually, people are actually probably right about that because it's actually big and it actually is all of Northeast. You might hear this just called Como. or Dinkytown even, which is an even smaller neighborhood within there. So this very large university area, you might hear just called as like Dinkytown. Somebody might say, oh, I live in Dinkytown, which they probably don't because it's not that big. And then, you know, Longfellow, typically people are going to call this all Longfellow. People are going to maybe call Powderhorn and Phillips the same thing. People are going to differentiate Whittier from Powderhorn, even though it's technically part of Powderhorn. And yeah, that's very basic, like how you might have those conversations. And somebody might say one thing, but actually mean something different. They just don't know that they mean something else. Now I want to talk about schools. Schools specifically in Minneapolis. Schools are very important to a lot of the people that we're helping, even people without kids, maybe somebody who's intending to have kids, or maybe somebody who's thinking about the resale value of being, you know, by good public schools. That said, plenty of the people that we're helping aren't interested, so if that's you, maybe fast forward, because this part might bore you to death, and maybe there's going to be some good stuff a little bit later. So I'm going to click over to a district map from the city of Minneapolis. And it's not that interactive, but it does kind of show some of the borders. And I'm gonna actually show you, I'm gonna overlay some of these things in a little bit. I'm gonna use Photoshop to overlay them to kind of show you, illustrate some of this point. But you'll see that the districts within the school district, if that makes any sense, doesn't make that much sense to me, but the way the district lines are drawn, they're gonna differ than what the neighborhoods are, right? So again, you might get some misinformation if you just listen to somebody that you know who says, yeah, if you're in, let's say, Southwest, you're going to go to Southwest High School, because as you can see here, there's Southwest High School that takes up this section, and then there's Washburn High School, which takes up this section. And if you remember, 36th Street is the northern border of Southwest Minneapolis, and 35W is the eastern border. So there's actually quite a bit east of 35W and maybe 6 blocks or so north of 36th that is also included in Washburn, right? So you can cross over the highway if you were, you know, particularly attracted to, let's say, Washburn High School or Justice Page. And likewise, in a small area, you can be north of 36th Street and also go to those schools. And before I start breaking this up anymore, I'm going to click over to niche.com, which we have genuinely found to be one of the most helpful resources as it comes to schools. For a while, we were doing a channel called Schools in the Twin Cities. It might start back up, hard to say, but really what we found as we looked into things is that niche.com seems to be the best resource, the most holistic look at school rankings, whereas there are other things like School Digger or Great Schools or things like that that in our opinion don't seem to be as holistic, right? They seem to have fewer criteria that they're measuring things on. So if we scroll down in the Minneapolis Public School District niche, whatever profile, I guess is what you want to call it, you're going to see that overall it gets a B. Keep in mind, it's a huge district. It probably has the most students of any other district. So 29,000 students pre-K through grade 12 in the district. That's big. That's a very large school district. So there's going to be a huge bit of variety across the school district. So again, keep that in mind. And then if we scroll down here, you're going to see that it's the 3rd most diverse school district in Minnesota, and it's the 51st most diverse school district in Minnesota. You can kind of go over to all of their rankings. So yeah, 51st most in America, at 49th out of 321. So that's actually not too bad. Top quarter for athletes, in about the top 3rd best school districts in Minnesota, and maybe right in the middle for best teachers in Minnesota. And then this stuff is, I think, less helpful in the grand scheme of things. So we're going to click back to that main profile, and I find this map can be helpful again. So this is pretty basic, look at the different schools across Minneapolis. And you can see, I think, pretty visibly, pretty obviously, that this southwest sort of portion is where the highest ranked schools are. And so if you were to look here, Southwest Senior High, B+, Washburn Senior High, A-, but you're going to see the most A's in that little portion right there. There's also one creeps over here, and then that's the only other A in Minneapolis proper. So that would be, again, if we click back to here, that would be, more or less this portion here, and then this portion right here are where, according to niche, the best, the highest rated public schools are. Then over here, to me, I think the story kind of tells that, Nokomis and kind of this area, they're still pretty, ranked pretty good, or they're getting a lot of B's and C pluses and things like that. And same with over here in the Longfellow neighborhood, but really a few here. You have the Dowling Elementary School, Howe Elementary School, and Sanford Middle School. And then Roosevelt Senior High gets a B-, but then even South Senior High School right here, it gets a B+. So if we click on the other map to kind of reveal where that is, South Senior High School is in, more or less, is serving parts of Longfellow, parts of course it's different lines, but parts of Powderhorn, and then all the way over to this western line along Hennepin Avenue, which in here is part of the Calhoun Isles neighborhood. So weird shape. Yeah, I would say so, but you can see that South High School ranks pretty darn good, all things considered. So then we'll pop up into there's like no schools here. In fairness, it's where the University of Minnesota is, so potentially not as much of a need, or potentially a lot of the real estate is taken up by the university. Then northeast, you're going to see a story of a lot of C's, C pluses, and things like that, other than Wade Park Elementary School in that northeasternmost little chunk, which is known as Wade Park. And you'll see that the northeast school, let's call it the district within the district, or whatever they call it, that takes up pretty much all of northeast and some of downtown, some of central. Again, interesting lines drawn here, but that's what they look like. And then if you cross over the river, you have, again, there's near north down here, and then there's Camden up here. Of course, the lines are different than the actual neighborhoods are, but to tell the story of how they're ranked pretty consistently across all of those, with the exception of Henry Senior High School gets a B, whereas North High School gets a C. And then lastly, one sort of line that is interesting that has changed, I think within the last 10 years or so, it might have even been more recently than that, is basically this section is now combined with this section. But if you remember that this is near north, this is mostly Calhoun Isles, all the way through here. That has now tied into that North High School and everything going on up here. And if we click over to the ratings map, you'll see that it's a story of a lot of C, C-, and then with the exception of Kenwood Elementary School, which gets a B. Then real quick, as we're talking about schools, I'm sorry if you're not interested in schools, keep going a little bit longer. So first of all, Minnesota was the first state to pass what's called a charter school law. So the city, the whole metro, has many different charter school programs, which are basically just public schools that are funded with more specific learning styles and more specific curriculum that's different than, let's say, a normal, traditional public school. Then let's say a traditional public school. And on this map in particular, a lot of that, what you're going to see is it's going to be called a citywide program, which means that you could opt for or apply for one of these charter schools or a magnet school or something like that, just one of these other schools other than the more traditional public schools, and you can get busing. Sometimes it's just a van because there's not that many students, but busing nonetheless to one of those schools from many different areas or from all around the city. So you could, in theory, live in the furthest northwest corner of Minneapolis, and you could go to a citywide program at the likes of Heritage Academy High School, right, or Longfellow High School. There are also other things to consider when it comes to schools, like there's open enrollment programs, right? So some people who live in Minneapolis proper may choose to open enroll in other districts. A couple that would come to mind that some people will do is if they lived in Southwest Minneapolis, even though as we saw, those are the highest ranked schools in Minneapolis, according to niche.com. They may choose to open enroll to Edina public schools, which are honestly ranked top 5 in the metro, right? Top 5 in the state. On the other hand, maybe somebody who lives in Northeast Minneapolis might try to open enroll to St. Anthony, which is also a very highly ranked, albeit pretty small, public school district. And then there are all sorts of charter and magnet schools all around the metro, and of course, really, really highly ranked, highly regarded private schools. And there definitely are people who live in the city proper who opt for private schools because that's the experience that they want for their kid, right, for their student. Okay, we're done talking about schools, at least for a little while. I want to talk a little bit of vibe. And I'm not going to talk about the entire metro, but to give you a more broad understanding of how things look and how things kind of work here. So first of all, the metro, I've talked about this on another Twin Cities Explained video, but it's very evenly spread, east, west, north, south. So if you live in Minneapolis proper, you're going to have pretty decent access to the entire metro. And likewise, if you live on any end of the metro, it's going to be decently easy for you to get into, say, downtown Minneapolis. And so when I say downtown Minneapolis, I mostly mean this whole area, what they called central Minneapolis earlier, right? This whole section here. But I would say some people would only think of downtown as what you could say is like the commercial business district, right? The CBD. So there's this guy right here is going to be more of a skyscraper kind of situation. And then you're going to have downtown east, downtown west, Elliott Park, a bunch of different things. And I would say this downtown area right here, sorry, everything is popping up, driving me a little crazy, if I'm being honest. I guess that's Google. So along Hennepin and along First Avenue, those are kind of like the most, I don't know, destination-y places for, let's say, clubbing or like smaller music venues or something like that. Not into clubbing, not my thing, never have been, but have gone to many, many a show, including the likes of First Avenue right here, legendary First Avenue, and you'll see like Target Center, that's where the Timberwolves play. If you scoot across here, you have US Bank Stadium, that's where the Minnesota Vikings play. Just across from the Target Center, right across a pretty complicated highway setup right over here is Target Field, that's where the Minnesota Twins play. All the other professional teams play in St. Paul. And so you have kind of the busy weekend streets, let's call it, right? Specifically Hennepin and First Avenue, those are kind of the most happening places. You have more of like a busy during the weekday, kind of, downtown area. Every downtown in the country, as far as I know, it looks a lot different post-COVID. But this is going to be busier during the weekday or weeknights or something like that. And this is going to be busiest on, say, like a Friday or something like that. Then you have a pretty interesting area known as the North Loop. You can also see here, that's called the Warehouse District. The Warehouse District is a smaller district within the North Loop, right? You see that that sort of includes all of that, and the Warehouse District is more of this thing right here. North Loop is probably one of the most walkable neighborhoods in Minneapolis. I did a walkable video on this channel, and North Loop and Uptown are really close, in my opinion, for walkability. Yeah, North Loop is much more condo and apartment based. Uptown, you're more likely to find maybe like a duplex or a fourplex, maybe an 8-unit building, whereas North Loop is a little more high-rise, kind of, maybe an 8-story building, but there's also a lot of really, really beautiful old warehouses that have since been converted into lofts. Probably, even if you don't live in North Loop, you'll end up in North Loop for a dinner or something like that, or just, you know, meeting up with friends, meeting up with a client or anything. It's very much like a destination. It's a place that people go. It's very cosmopolitan, and it's probably the fastest growing part of downtown in terms of overall occupancy. But another area that's really changed a lot in the past decade is downtown East. I lived in downtown East I think right when this channel started or shortly after this channel started, I lived in downtown East. I really, really enjoyed living there, but it was an apartment, and eventually I bought a place. And downtown East includes what's also known as sort of the Mill District. This section in the green right here, more or less, is called the Mill District. And then across Washington Avenue is more colloquially downtown East. Again, you have the US Bank Stadium, you have the Armory, which is a pretty awesome music venue, and of course you have HCMC, Hennepin County Medical Clinic, a very large hospital. So there are a ton of condos around this area, a lot of apartments and things like that. But you will see, if I were to click on restaurants on Google, there's a decent bit, specifically along Washington. And then as you sort of get a little bit further to the west, it starts to pick up a bit, but not much going on here. Not much to do here. There's, a park and, the hospital and the US Bank Stadium, but not much as far as like going out is concerned. If I were to click here, this is barely even tells the tale of how many restaurants there are down here. This is a very, very dense area in terms of different restaurants and things like that. And then again, this North Loop area, especially in this section, let's say, give or take a couple blocks along Washington Avenue, there's going to be a ton of restaurants, and some of the best in the whole metropolitan area are going to be right here. Some really good stuff there. As we're talking restaurants, a few other places that come to mind that are going to have a pretty good density of restaurants. Northeast Minneapolis, some very good restaurants, a lot of breweries, distilleries, and things like that. I equate Northeast Minneapolis more with the brewery and sort of that social side of things than, say, the fancier restaurant, if that makes any sense. That said, there are some very, very nice restaurants here, including the likes of Young Joni, which is sort of Michelin star award chef, has a really amazing restaurant there. It's beautiful, and that's in Northeast. The other place where I think probably the highest density of restaurants is generally speaking uptown, let's call it Calhoun Isles, but if you know, now we know that Powderhorn is over here as well. Powderhorn has quite a few restaurants as well. So I would say this area in Uptown, in Whittier, this whole area is called Eat Street. A lot of really great restaurants there. And then along Lake Street, there's a ton, and same with sprinkled throughout some of Powderhorn, but I would say mostly along Lake Street, Hennepin, Lindale is where I think you'll find the highest density of those restaurants. Personally, I think one of the things that Minneapolis does better than just about anywhere in the country, if not anywhere, is access to park spaces and even maybe more specifically, access to biking. I did a whole video on this channel about biking in the Twin Cities. Check it out. It's pretty fun and very, very immersive. It's not me sitting at a desk. It's a lot of footage of what the actual trails look like, which they are world-class trails throughout the city. First of all, I always say that I have to be careful when comparing Minneapolis to Minneapolis, or even just Minnesota to Minnesota, because for example, we do parks at an unbelievable level, and if I said one area had less parks than another area of Minneapolis, that's not necessarily fair to that area, because depending on where you're coming from, the Southeast, Texas, California, your access to parks is going to be insane compared to where you're coming from. And the ease of use and the ease of access is going to be a very different experience than probably what you're used to. And that is based on feedback from a bunch of people that we've helped move here. That is one thing that a lot of people are very, very surprised by. But specifically, as far as I'm concerned, the most naturally beautiful areas and the most naturally plentiful park spaces are in a few areas of Minneapolis. That's really important to me, and so that's some of why I have virtual tours in some areas and not necessarily in other areas, because again, that's so much of like the lifestyle that I value. So first of all, these lakes right here, Lake Harriet, Bedamakoska, Lake of the Isles, and Cedar Lake. are part of what's called the chain of lakes. To me, those are some of the most beautiful areas in Minneapolis, if not the best, right? I love them. I think they're beautiful. I'm there all the time, right? And so you have also bike access around all of Lake of the Isles, all of Bedeh-Makaska, all of Lake Harriet, and they're chained together. And they're part of what's known as the Grand Rounds Scenic Bike Route, Scenic Bike Trail.
Scenic byways.
Scenic byway. But I'm not going to go into too much detail on that because I have other videos where I talk about it at length, specifically the biking video. But you have crazy access where that Grand Round Scenic Byway goes fundamentally from here all around these lakes, all up through Theodore Wirth, along Memorial, head east along Victory Memorial, more or less kind of along the Mississippi River. You see, like there's less lakes, right? There's less park spaces in Northeast. It's more about breweries, right? And more about sort of going out and things like that. Less about the park spaces. Then along the river, some really beautiful park spaces and views of downtown and stuff along here, specifically on the bike trail. And then it picks up along the West River Parkway, goes all the way around here along the parkway, starts at Minnehaha Falls, starts heading west, which is beautiful, by the way. Check it out. And then it goes all along this Minnehaha Parkway bike route or something like that. I forget the name exactly. But then it goes along here, along the creek, beautiful protected paths along the creek, and then that ends back up at Lake Harriet. So to me, access to these lakes, access to that bike trail along the creek, that's some of the best lifestyle, in my opinion, that exists in the city for what I'm looking for in particular, which is just, to be in really pretty places. That's something that I really care about, and I love to be able to see water a lot. I don't know why, but it's just part of who I am and part of what, makes me find joy in life. If you're looking for very dense living, I talked about walkability. I would say this whole section, what's known as Uptown, Whittier, basically east of Hennepin here, over to 35W, it's very, very dense, but not necessarily like high rises, right? In like a downtown. Downtown, very dense, already touched on that. So if that's what you're looking for, that's where you have to be, is in downtown. Maybe just a little bit across here, like where my office is in this Nicollet Island area, kind of right around here. There's a little bit of a density, something akin to a downtown feeling, but much, much calmer than just across the river in proper downtown. Then, for example, if you wanted to live in a duplex or a fourplex, or you wanted to own a duplex or a fourplex, you will find the highest collection of those within the city are going to be, and that's something that I'm thinking about, something I'm looking at, something we've helped a lot of people do, but specifically the Calhoun Isles neighborhood, Whittier, maybe a little bit of Kingfield right here. There's a lot in the Powderhorn area, a lot in the Phillips area, and then probably the other two spots are near North in particular and Northeast Minneapolis. That said, the sort of southern edges, let's say Nokomis, Southwest, the eastern edge of Powderhorn, maybe the very northern part of the Camden area, you're going to find less of those. It's going to become a little bit, more neighborhoody in terms of single family homes only, right? And less multifamily units, less commercial spaces on the whole. And now really the only thing that I haven't discussed yet in this video is like just how close to St. Paul all of these places are. First of all, St. Paul is immediately to the east. So literally contiguous to Minneapolis is St. Paul. The river is one of the most prominent dividing lines, and then randomly a little bit here as well. But there are a few main bridges that cross the river into St. Paul or provide access into St. Paul. The biggest ones that come to mind are 46th Street or Ford Parkway. Then here's Lake Street or Marshall. There's another one that crosses the river but just goes into Minneapolis along Franklin Avenue. And so that's all going to provide really, really slick access over to St. Paul. So if you like the idea of, what offerings Minneapolis has, but you maybe are attracted to a home or certain prices within St. Paul, your access is going to be really, really easy. I would say that there are plenty of neighborhoods in Minneapolis and St. Paul where if you dropped a pin on Google, and just were like, what neighborhood do you think we're in? I would have a hard time guessing. Or I would say, I don't know, there's 3 or 4 that would be my best guess. And I'd probably get, one of those right, but just sort of visually, aesthetically, there's going to be a lot of parallels across all of those. So that said, I hope this has been helpful, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.